welcome Shira Gill to discuss her book, Minimalista, your step-by-step guide to a better home, wardrobe, and life. Feeling good at home is critical, especially now that so many of us are working remotely. In Minimalista, Shira shares her complete toolkit for the first time, built around 5 key steps: clarify, edit, organize, elevate, and maintain. The most important thing you can do is start. And small victories, achieved one at a time, will snowball into massive transformation. Broken into small, bite-sized chunks, Minimalista makes it clear that if the process is fun and easy to follow, anyone can learn the principles of editing and organization. Shira is a creative force behind Shira Gill Home, a lifestyle brand and popular blog. Her virtual closet makeover program and Get Organized masterclass sell out instantly with hundreds of participants from all around the world. Her work has caught the attention of A-list celebrities, Olympic athletes, and tech CEOs. Shira has contributed to national publications including Real Simple, Sunset, Goop, and Parents. Her work and home have also been featured in the New York Times, InStyle, HGTV, Forbes, Harper's Bazaar, and so much more. Please join me in welcoming Shira Gill.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Welcome. I was going to say your background behind you is beautiful, organized. You're really living, as an example of this organized minimalist life.
Trying to walk the walk,
Of course. Well, I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I continually feel like my home is an ongoing edit. After 2 years of home, I think many of us need this conversation to figure out, where do I begin? How do I edit all of the stuff that I have at home, right? So out of curiosity, based on the conversations that you've had, do you think people became more organized during the pandemic, or are we going to be seeing a massive cleanup come 2022?
Yeah, it was a combination of factors, depending on people's circumstances. But I certainly think, everyone I spoke with throughout the pandemic, especially when we were in lockdown, I think everyone just became so much more aware of the effects that their home had on them, for better or for worse. I do think there was sort of a big decluttering trend that happened, if you will, for the people that were stuck at home, because it just, I think for many people, started feeling oppressive, things that they didn't notice before or weren't on their radar, or many people who worked out of the home all day and then just kind of came home and crashed were suddenly surrounded by all of the things. So yes, and yes. I think there was a huge decluttering sweep, and I think everyone I know still can always use more decluttering because life isn't static and things just keep coming at us and coming into our lives. And now with the holidays coming up, there's all of those challenges as well.
And I think everyone listening today, we're going to get some good tips. So stay tuned. So your book, Minimalista, was just published on November 2nd, hot off the press. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you about what the term minimalism means. For example, I love collecting antiques and I have a not so secret shopping habit, but I am very devoted towards organization and cleanliness in my house, right?
Yeah.
So I think the general public is trying to understand, is minimalism having nothing, just some things? What do you think?
Yeah. So I think there's such a massive misconception about what minimalism is. I think most people generally assume that it's like living in a stark box, not having things, scarcity, deprivation, lack of warmth or coziness or personality. And so the way I define minimalism in my work, my home, and my book is really, it's about intentionality. So to me, minimalism is a way of life where you focus in on what's important and what you value, what your priorities are, and you thoughtfully strip away the rest. So it's about clarity and then leveraging that clarity to then reduce the things that are just clamoring for your attention, providing stress or anxiety or distraction, and really ultimately arriving at the perfect amount of stuff for you. So, I've worked with people in 300 square foot studio apartments, and I've worked with people in 10,000 square foot mansions and everything in between. And everyone arrives at their own version of what the perfect amount is and what enough is. But I think what most people don't do or haven't really slowed down to take the time to do is to just evaluate, what do I want? What is standing in the way? And is the stuff that surrounds me supporting my life and supporting the vision that I have for how I want to live? Or is it really detracting? Is it weighing me down? So that's really what my work is all about, is just helping people get more intentional, whatever that may look like for them.
And based on your research and experiences, can you talk a little bit more about, the reasons for why people want things, and what having less, feels like and looks like? Like how does one live an intentional life when they're thinking about what and when to buy things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're in, our Western world, especially, there's such a consumerist culture. It's pervasive in everything, right? Like the notifications we get on our phone that somehow knows we were thinking about sunglasses, or, all of the advertisements, the conversations we have with friends. I think it's incessant, and I feel it all the time. And I've certainly bought things that I didn't need, or gone on a midnight shopping bender. I think, what I see is just, it's so much easier to buy than it is to kind of press pause and take a breath and evaluate, what's the cost of bringing this item into my home and life? Like, is it going to be a net positive or a net negative after that little dopamine hit is over? So, I like pretty things as much as the next person, and I love interior design, and I love fashion and styling and all of the things. But I found personally, when I just kept buying and buying, I felt more and more stressed, distracted, anxious, worried about my finances, worried about the environment. And so for me, being more intentional about what I allow into my home is a way of kind of reclaiming control in a world where we don't have control over many, if not most things. And so in the work with, my clients and my community, what I've seen is this kind of freedom and liberation that comes simply from questioning, do the things that surround me actually help my life, or do they hinder my life? When I have 10 Amazon boxes at my door, is it exciting? Is it stressful? How do I end up feeling? Is it just going to end up being a pile of cardboard or a bunch of things in the landfill? How do I feel about that? Those answers are different for everyone depending on their values. But I guess my mission is just to start asking more questions about what we're consuming, the quantity, and the why. And one of the things I've noticed a lot in my work is just, and even I'll use myself as an example, I buy things a lot if I'm bored, or if I'm lonely, or if I'm having a negative emotion or something happen. I find myself wanting to fill that discomfort with a thing, with that dopamine hit that feels so good and kind of provide some relief. And so what I've started doing is, if I feel that kind of surge of I want to buy, I will just take a deep breath and write down the thing, and just tell myself, if you want it tomorrow or next week, you can get it, but we're not going to impulsively buy it. And I would say 90% of the time it's poof, forgotten. And then if I do think about it and still want it, then at least I know, oh, great, this is something that actually is going to be valuable, and I'm making a solid decision.
I think that's a great technique that you just shared. I was going to ask you actually, what types of questions should you ask yourself, or is there a waiting period that you should introduce before you bring something into your home, right? But I think you're absolutely correct. Retail therapy is a very real thing. I think people do get that dopamine hit that you refer to, right? So being intentional and asking yourself, do I really, really want this? Is this really what I need? Or is it just going to satisfy me this current time, is an important question to ask. So I want to ask you really quickly then, do you also opt into alternative methods of acquiring things like thrifting or buy nothing pages? What do you do once you go through the process of decluttering your home? Where do you give all these things to, or think about, redistributing to?
Yeah. So one of the best ways I found is actually just in my local community. And I think, there was a time during the pandemic where literally all of the Goodwills were at capacity. Like I would drive around with my things and every single place was like, we're done, we're at capacity, no more. And so I started, both for myself and for my clients, having to get kind of scrappy and creative and think outside the box. And I found, yes, buy nothing groups, posting to, like, I'm a mom, and so posting to a local parents group and saying, hey, I've got 2 blenders and I only need 1. Does anyone need a blender? I could pass things on so quickly and have kind of the satisfaction of knowing it wasn't just getting dumped on a corner and hoping it will make it to a home. There's neighborhood groups that I have found to be very, very successful. And I've also done a lot of Craigslist free. So if I have something, even if it is worth something, if I'm kind of valuing my time more than, the sunken cost of the thing, I'll throw it on Craigslist free, put it on the corner. It will be gone in 2 seconds. And in addition, local nonprofit schools, theaters, libraries, like there's just so many places to ask, do you have a need for these things that I don't need?
Actually, I think these are great suggestions. I was going to say, in New York City, there's a very popular Instagram page called Stooping New York City.
Yeah.
People just say, like, I've put something out on the street that I've decluttered. I don't need this anymore. And just in like 30 minutes, it'll be gone. Like someone will have found a home for it. So I want to transition really quickly to you. And you live in a 1,300 square foot home with your family of 4. And I think about my partner and I during the pandemic. We had a lot of stuff. We were combining both of our homes together, right? So I'm wondering, how often are you evaluating the state of clutter and excess in your home? Like, how often should people be doing this? Is it on a weekly basis? You put aside an hour with your family to do it? Monthly? 6 months? What have you seen works best?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm in it's actually 1,200 square feet. It's even smaller. And we have 2 tiny closets, no garage, no attic. So we definitely need to our space keeps us in check, I guess. So sometimes it's easier when you are in a smaller space. But I would say, I'm kind of an anti-rule person. So I don't want to say like everyone needs to evaluate every month. Because I just think depending on your lifestyle and your time and all of that, it's not going to happen. What I will say is when you feel like things are out of control or your home feels cluttered or disorganized, I always like to start one room at a time and one small project at a time. And so I kind of work my way through, and I did that with my own home years ago, kind of doing the process of editing and organizing and setting things up. And once you get to a point where you feel like you've reached some sort of equilibrium, of course, it's never going to be perfect because life isn't static. But, I've more or less reached a point where our house feels pretty good and pretty minimal, pretty dialed in. I still have 2 kids and a husband and a puppy, and we work full time. And so there is constantly stuff coming into our house. So my real answer is like 5 minutes a day. So the things the kind of habit shifts that really will make a big difference are super simple things like when the mail comes in, deal with it immediately. Like take the 2 minutes to toss anything into the junk or shred anything and have an inbox. At the end of the day, decide which clothes are clean and which clothes are dirty. Put them away. Do the dishes at night before you go to bed. So what I noticed is I kind of integrate these little habits all through my day. So I never really feel like there's a mountain of clutter or disorganization to deal with. And that would be my best advice, is that I think most people don't have the time or bandwidth to, spend hours or days or even weeks culling through everything they've ever owned. But everybody can start integrating these tiny habit shifts of just put it away right away, one in, one out is a huge thing I always practice that kind of keeps things solid. So I want a pair of shoes. What pair of shoes am I going to donate? And if I have no shoes that I want to donate, I'll really try to not buy another pair. So things like that just kind of keep things running smoothly.
That's a wonderful tip. Actually, I'm laughing because my partner's always like, you're buying one dress, one's gotta go, babe. And I'm always like, really? But
Right.
it's a way to keep yourself accountable when you're thinking about, organizing a home and making sure that you don't end up feeling overwhelmed by too many things, right? And I also really like your 5-minute tip because it doesn't feel overwhelming. It's something that everyone can do every day. Just take 5 minutes, scan your surroundings, what can be put away, what can be taken care of immediately that doesn't require a lot of work, right? So I want to go back to that in a little bit. But before we move on, I'd also love to hear a little bit about tips that you have for small spaces.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the Google offices happen to be in areas, for example, like I'm in the New York City office here, and most people live in apartments that aren't 10,000 square feet, right? Yeah. So what tips do you have for living and organizing in smaller spaces?
Yeah, so I would say, the biggest tip, which is so obvious, right, is just less stuff. Is like number one organizing tip is you don't need more storage, you need less stuff typically if you're in a smaller space. And then I like any type of furniture that can kind of do double duty. So like we have a pretty credenza in our entryway, but it actually holds all of our entry stuff because we don't have an entry closet. So it kind of looks like it's meant for a living room and it's nice to look at, but inside are like my kids' dirty shoes and homework and dog toys and poop bags. So like taking the things that are utilitarian things that everybody needs to own and concealing them. Number one tip aside from, editing your stuff, because everything we see provides a lot of visual distraction and stimulation. So anytime you can take something that you need and tuck it in a concealed storage vessel, the better. I also am a big fan of just matching uniform storage. So say hypothetically you have a shelf with 4 bins or baskets. If they're all the same size, shape, style, and color, they're going to disappear in the background and feel really easy on the eyes and cohesive. So I do things like that a lot. Really thinking about like the colors and the textures you want to be surrounded by. I'm, in a small space, but I've painted everything white, as you can see. And so basically it feels lighter and brighter and airier.
Open.
Yeah, just open and light, even though it's quite a small space and has to do double duty as, I'm in my dining room where my kids do homework and we eat dinner, but I also do podcasts and talk and speaking engagements and write books from the same space. So I think having it feel very neutral and streamlined makes it very convertible. I'll also point out, since people can see me, we took this whole wall and built storage into it. So it looks like a clean white wall, but behind me is everything from our kid art, my organizing supplies, vases, platters, alcohol, entertaining stuff, stamps, crafts. But you can see it just looks and feels clean. So thinking about how can you take those utilitarian things that you need and kind of make them disappear so that it can feel really easy on the eyes.
I love that concept of doing double duty. So you have something that is, aesthetic, like a credenza, but if it has storage in it, it's great. So looking for things like that, I think could really help people feel a sense of peace when they're looking at their home. It's like,
a storage bench is another great example, like having a bench that you can open up and put a million things in, but then it just feels like a lovely bench. Getting creative.
Yes, it's kind of that out of sight, out of mind, doesn't stress you and having to look at it.
Yes.
I want to talk about something that you just mentioned, right? So you're doing a lot of work on your dining room table, and dining rooms tend to be very communal places for families, right? Now that our workspaces and our living spaces have melded during the pandemic, how do you set boundaries with your family and your space so that you can decompress and transition between work and off time?
Yeah. Super challenging, and it's been a work in progress, but I can share a few things that have been helpful. So number one is just having one place in your home that is kind of dedicated as a tech-free or work-free zone. I know we had to get very scrappy and creative when our entire family was suddenly stuck at home working and, distance learning together. And I was telling you earlier, it was kind of this crazy musical chairs. Now, at least my kids are back in school, but I'm still working right in the middle of my home. So I have kind of delegated my bedroom as a tech-free zone and put a boundary on that. I don't work in my bedroom. I don't have electronics in my bedroom. That is a space that's just for rest, really, and like resetting. Some other things are sensory cues. So, I'm at this dining room table and I work all day and I'm kind of in work mode. And at the end of the day, I take my computer and my mic and my laptop stand and anything associated with work. I tuck it back into a credenza so it's completely out of sight. I'll change the lighting. So I'll like dim the lights, or maybe I'll light a candle. I often put on music, and because typically I'm wrapping up work and going right into family dinner time. And so just those little things that can engage the senses are kind of a nice sensory cue of like, we're transitioning, we're in a new mode now. So that has been really helpful. And I would say just getting creative about how can you kind of box up your work from home supplies and like even literally wheel them out of the way. So I've set up like work from home carts, or even just a box with a lid on it that you then tuck away, so that you can feel like visually all of that is gone at the end of the day.
I think we've touched on a recurring theme, which is what we see visually really impacts our actions and the decisions that we decide to make, right? So in this case, I've heard of great things too, like what you've been mentioning, phone blankets, like people tuck their phones away outside of the room.
Amazing.
That's important, because I do think we are definitely an overconnected society, and a lot of people have a very hard time sleeping and having peaceful sleep, and just winding down after being on the computer for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, depending on the type of work that you have to do. And even if you're not working a computer job, you're still on your phone, because that's just a big part of our culture today. So I want to ask you quickly too, because you mentioned that your kids are back in school, and during the time that you lived together all at home in this musical chairs world, right? How did you think about getting your children on board and responsible with organizing, right? Because I do think a big burden for a lot of working parents, and especially working moms, is a lot of cleanup after kids sometimes, right? So how do you motivate them to also be a part of your solution?
Yes. So I will say my kids I've never gotten it to the point where they're actually excited about organizing or cleaning up, but I have found a way to get them to be cooperative. And so I think setting very clear limits. I used to be a preschool teacher back in the day. And so everything was about clear guidelines and clear limits and boundaries for kids, which they really understand. And so I think, just like when kids go to school, they have rules, they have places where they put things. They don't just dump their backpack and strew it all over the room, right? And so I think as a parent, we have to do two things. We have to, one, set up simple, intuitive systems so that our kids have a place. Like often I've seen parents who were like so frustrated because their kids are throwing stuff everywhere. And I ask them, well, where is it supposed to go? And even the parents don't know. They haven't established a clear zone for like where homework should go at the end of the day, or where the games should go, or the active puzzles, or the Legos. So I think number one is just thinking about, for all of the things that I want my kids to clean up, is there an easy, intuitive, designated place to put it? And if not, get your kid involved and say, hey, I know you love your Legos. Where's a good place? Do you want a bin? Do you want a Lego table? Like, let's solve this problem together, which helps get buy-in. Like I did that with my kids, had a stuffed animal problem, or it was a problem for me. And they were just everywhere for years. And I finally said, okay, we need a safe spot for your stuffed animals. And they picked out this like huge rolling bin and they loved it. And then when it was cleanup time, they would dump all the stuffed animals in the bin. So I think it's working with your kids to find solutions instead of getting into kind of the nagging lecturing cycle. Being curious, like, are they not cleaning up because they don't know where? Am I not giving them clear guidelines? I'm big into transitions. So anytime there's a natural transition in your day is a great opportunity for a 5-minute tidy or like a 2-minute reset. And I will try to make things appealing with my kids by saying like, hey, our house is a mess. Let's do a 5-minute tidy and then go get an ice cream. Or, having something that is fun and appealing. And so it's not negotiable that we're going to clean up, but let's do it fast together so we can like get on to the next thing that we want to do.
I think all that advice is very solid. Parents aren't building the infrastructure to tell their kids where to put things. It's hard to know where to work as a team, right? So
it's challenging. And I'm not to blame the parents. I mean, this is like, I learned this through experience of my kids saying, well, I don't know where the play food goes. And I was like, oh, I need to get a basket for the play food, right? So it's not being judgmental about it or blaming, but just that lens of curiosity and kind of the like, let's troubleshoot this instead of just throwing our hands up. And those simple systems go a long way. A bin is a system.
Yes, and asking your kids questions and just having that open, ongoing conversation with them. I think kids always have great insights. So when you ask them things, you begin to understand more about where they're coming from.
Yes.
One question I have for you, we've been talking a lot about organizing now, right? And I do think the process of organizing can feel very paralyzing and overwhelming for many, for various reasons, right? It can feel very hard sometimes to get rid of something that is sentimental to you, or something that once had sentimental value for you, or sometimes you just feel exhausted and you don't have the time to organize, or it's just the last thing in your priority list.
Yeah.
How do you get started? And I know you have this 5-step process. Maybe you want to talk about that with our audience.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so in a nutshell, my 5-step process starts with the first step is clarify. And that's always where I start because people want to start by getting all of the bins and baskets or, getting right into action. But I think the first thing is always just to clarify, why do I want to get organized? Why? Like what impact would it have on my life? What is my motivating and compelling reason? And certainly I've met people who don't want to get organized, and that's fine, right? Like I've met artists who say, I love the mess of my studio and it feels creative and stimulating. So then there's not an issue. But for most of the people that I work with, there is a really compelling reason. And I'll share a few of them. Like a lot of people that I've worked with have said they feel shame about their homes and they feel embarrassed to have people over or to host a party or even to invite a friend over because they feel like their house feels kind of messy or shameful or out of control and not reflective of who they are as a person or as a professional. That's a big one. I've met people who have just come out of a divorce or a loss, some huge life transition, and they feel like they just let everything go and they want to get organized to feel like they are reclaiming their life and starting fresh. So whatever that reason may be, it could just be, I want to find my keys in the morning. It doesn't have to be this big, deep reason, but I think the first thing is just you've got to identify, why do I care about this? Why do I want to make a change? Step 2 then is edit. So I talked about, my definition of minimalism is about identifying what's important and stripping away the rest. So that's that clarity piece is once like this is how I want to live or the changes I want to make in my life, then it makes it much easier to start letting go when you know what you want. So, like an example for me, I realized years ago, I really missed traveling and my life didn't feel as conducive to traveling, having kids and a dog and so much going on. And I thought, well, if my house is really streamlined, we can rent it out on Airbnb or another site. And that can allow us to leave at the drop of a hat and go anywhere we want in the world. And so that vision of what I wanted made it really easy to let go of things that I maybe otherwise would have clung to or rationalized keeping. So that's editing. And then the third step is organize. And I really think people overcomplicate organization. I think organization is actually the most simple and intuitive part of the process, which is namely, once you've let go of the excess and you're just sitting with the things that you want to keep and that you value, you plop like with like and put them somewhere together. So that's it. Like it really can be that simple. You don't need to color code or alphabetize or file fold unless that brings you joy. For me, organization is just like things together and everything has a dedicated home. And then 4 is elevate. So that's kind of the fun styling design. Like maybe you want new pretty bins or baskets, or you want to add something beautiful or buy art for your space or bring in fresh flowers, but something kind of the cherry on top. And then maintain, we talked about, is just those little daily habit shifts, like don't put it down, put it away, 1 in, 1 out, the 5-minute tidy before bed. So that's kind of like the big broad process. And then the quick answer to where to start if you're totally overwhelmed is pick a drawer, pick 1 drawer. I have often with clients who just feel borderline panicked about their spaces, just done the junk drawer or just done the sock drawer. I call it a 15-minute win because you can literally take everything out, wipe down your drawer, make clear decisions about what you want to keep and what you want to let go of, maybe put in some drawer dividers, plop it back in, and now you have success under your belt and momentum, hopefully, to keep going.
I love all of this. 15 minutes, something that we all can do too. 5 minutes here and there, and 15 minutes maybe once a week, once a month to just work on a drawer. I just have a quick question for you on the editing part, because I think this is a part that a lot of people have difficulty with, right? Because once they have found out the reason, like for you, I'd like to be able to travel at any given moment. But once you start looking at your items, what type of questions do you ask yourself to decide like what to keep, right? Because that edit part I think is really hard, because I'm like, oh, I could use this one day, or like, oh, I remember I had this item during that time. So how do you really ask yourself like the hard?
Yeah. So, and I do find most people ask questions that are rooted in scarcity. So a lot of people, the norm is to ask questions like, could I need this one day? Or what if this was useful one day? Or what if the person who gave this to me comes knocking and the thing's gone and I'm going to feel terribly guilty? So I prefer to kind of flip the type of questions to questions that I think are more rooted in abundance, which are questions like, does this support my current vision for the life that I want to lead? Is this item adding value to my life right now? Would I buy this item for full price today? And then one that really helps me is, could this item greatly benefit somebody else? Or could it bring joy to somebody else, where for me, it's just kind of a meh item? So that often really helps me, like even with something nice or high value, like if I have a pair of beautiful shoes, but I never wear them and they're slightly uncomfortable, but I'm kind of bummed that I spent whatever amount of money on them. And then if I can identify in my head a friend who would love these shoes, it's like a no-brainer. Like it feels great to give and be generous. And now I don't have these shoes to deal with. So I'm all about thinking really carefully about, do the things support the vision for the life I want now. And I think where people get derailed is the kind of like, but I was this person, or what if I want to take up scuba diving again? And, you know, I've heard it all. And I think I've given away so many things in my life. And I think only once or twice ever have I thought, oh man, I could have used that thing and now I have to go buy it or borrow it. But it's been such a net positive to have the freedom and kind of the spaciousness in my life. And I think the other big question that I always like to ask is just, which do you value more right now, the stuff or the space? So I always love space. Like space makes me happy and feel free and liberated and calm. And stuff often doesn't. It makes me feel anxious or distracted. And so that can be a good clarifying question as well. Even just something as simple as like the pair of shoes. Do I want the space that this pair of shoes takes up in my closet, or would I rather keep the shoes?
I like the way that you put this. Is it, you know, space or the stuff? And also kind of this idea of like abundance, scarcity, right? I do feel like we kind of live in a world where there's a lot of abundance all about. For some reason, there's a sense of scarcity that many people feel. That's why maybe I'll need this at some point. Maybe I'll just keep it, right? So I think a lot of the tips that you just gave were very relatable and very useful for us to apply to our lives. And you spoke a lot about emotions towards the tail end of your last response. And I do feel like a lot of people have felt a loss of control and routine in their lives over these past almost 2 years of at home, right?
Yeah.
What are the emotional and like mental health benefits of having a more organized home? And, you know, does this tend to affect some people more than others? Just asking because I do feel like it's something we don't talk about as often, but it can maybe bring you a lot more, you know, sense of being centered.
Yes. So, you know, I am not a researcher or a scientist, but I have read multiple studies that do link clutter to anxiety and depression, specifically for women. So the stats are much higher for women with that link. But I think just anecdotally in my own work, you know, I've had now thousands of clients all over the world. And the things that I hear again and again are that clutter and disorganization lead to feelings of shame, guilt, paralysis, overwhelm, anxiety, stress. And that kind of the opposite is also true. So once people do get on top of their clutter and make those choices, even in a few spaces, like not even their entire house, I have people telling me they feel lighter, they feel liberated, they feel more confident, they feel like they have more mental clarity. They're more productive and efficient at home and in work. They're not losing things anymore. So suddenly there's more time. There's less sunken cost in the repeat buying again and again because you can't find things or you don't really have a sense of what you own. So I've seen, you know, in my own life and with the people that I've worked with, just an exponential value in kind of the benefit of living in this more streamlined and intentional way. It just has had a ripple effect into, relationships is another one, is so much fighting and stress and emotion between everyone from like, you know, spouses, parents, kids. There can be so much to fight about when people are feeling overstimulated and out of control in their homes. And so I think, you know, I have my fair share of stressors in my life, but my home isn't one of them. And so that feels really like a gift to know when I go home, I'm going to feel calm and relaxed.
I love the way you put all of that. It's true. I think, you know, being overstimulated in the home does lead to feelings of not being able to relax sometimes. So whatever we can do to get the book, Minimalista, I have it right here. It's a beautiful book, by the way, for all those who are, this is a press release, but for all those who are listening after this taping, you can look in the description on this YouTube link and get a copy of Shira's book. And we have so many questions.
Oh, good.
So before I move forward, I just want to ask you one last question, and it is, tell us about your next project and how we can continue to stay, engaged and updated with what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. So I have lots of fun things in the works. So I have some on-demand classes. I'm going to be doing some live workshops where you can kind of organize live with me in the new year. So if you get on my mailing list, you'll be the first to know about that. And then I do have a new book in the works where I'm going to be traveling the world and interviewing home organizers all over the globe and showcasing their organized homes, tips, tricks, and hacks. So that will be minimalists, maximalists, and everything in between. So I'm very excited about that one.
That's so wonderful. And for all those who are interested, Shira is very active on Instagram. You can find her at Shira Gill on Instagram. And I'm really looking forward to that book because I'm wondering if there are like culture differences when you go around the world and how people look at, space and clutter across different cultures.
Yes.
So I think we can get started on some of these questions. All right. And the first question we have, I think it's going to pop up on the screen here.
Oh, good.
All right, this is from Lee. I would love recommendations on storage of maternity clothes and outgrown baby clothes that you may or may not need later. I'm having a hard time parting with them. This is a great question.
That is a great question. And since I have 2 kids, I can answer it from my firsthand experience. So what I like doing is making a designated physical boundary for that sort of stuff. So say maternity clothes, whether, you're in a studio apartment or a larger home, you can define. So for me, I just said, I will have one large bin that will house kind of the best and the brightest of my maternity clothes. And so creating a physical boundary then makes it so that you can round up all of them, pick out all your favorites that fit in that box, and then donate the rest. So I find just having that boundary and container is really helpful. With regard to baby clothes and gear and stuff like that, often it's dictated by the storage space that you have. I like to make rules around it for myself. Like when I had my first daughter and I knew I wanted to have another baby, I thought, what are kind of the best and the brightest things that are high quality, that I know that I would buy again? And what do I have room to store? So in our case, we only stored 2 pieces of gear. And then I used 1 drawer in my child's dresser for all of like the best and the brightest baby clothes and blankets and swaddles that fit in that drawer. So I hope that's helpful, but thinking about like containment physically can be really instructive. So then you're just playing a game of what are my favorites within this category that fits in this designated place.
Thank you, Shira. And next up, from Susan, what is your rule for decluttering closet or items that you don't use? For example, haven't used it or worn it for 1 year, 2 years, it's got to go. I feel like I'm a hoarder and I always think I will wear that shirt eventually. This is Susan, you, and everybody else. Yeah. So, would love to hear your thoughts, Shira.
Yeah. So I don't love the like 1 year, 2 year thing. I just like keeping it very present. So when I work with closet clients, it's that same thing of how do you want to present yourself? What do you feel good in now? Like with the current body that you have, if nothing ever happened, how do you feel best? And again, it's a tough sell for some people, especially whose weight tends to fluctuate. People ask me, can I have like my skinny clothes, hidden here? And sure, you can, but I have found historically that having clothes in multiple sizes and sort of transitional or conditional clothes typically doesn't make people feel great. It kind of sends the message that something's wrong with your body now, or things aren't how they're supposed to be. So I like instead to just kind of say, this is what we're working with. How do we want to dress it? How do we feel best? what fits me, what flatters me, what feels good now, and making sure that everything in your closet kind of checks those boxes. And if you are trying to lose weight, or maybe you're pregnant or you're in some sort of transition, I would suggest having a very curated box or bin of the items that don't fit or may be appropriate for some other time in your life. I always try to limit that to one bin. So kind of a tough love approach. I get a lot of resistance on it, but I just find that it feels better psychologically to fully embrace who you are, what your life is, instead of having that kind of ongoing mental limbo.
I think that's great advice, Shira. I'm very guilty of that. Pre-pandemic, my weight was at one weight, and then post-pandemic, like most of the world, my jean size has definitely changed. But
Yeah.
I've kept, the old jeans, and I've been like, oh, eventually I'll get to them, but they take up so much space. So
Yeah.
maybe after this, I'll have to go back and keep just what's making me happy with my current life today.
Yeah, and maybe you pluck out a few, like the best and the brightest. Like, I know I'd be thrilled to wear these jeans. If I lost X amount of weight, I'm going to put them in my like little bin that I set aside. I just find it feels better to open up a closet and know that everything in it fits and flatters and feels good.
Great tip. I think a lot of us can really benefit from that. And the next question, please. Kate, how do you suggest navigating conversations with household members who may not want to declutter?
Yeah, that is such a good question and comes up all the time in my work. And I think I've seen so much friction and fighting when it comes to getting on the same page as your family members. The number one thing I would say is start by just walking the walk before you even broach it. So what I see a lot is a lot of like finger pointing at people who haven't, embodied the lifestyle maybe that you want. And, I'm guilty of this as well, of like saying to my husband, like, I want this or that or the other, without first, tackling every single item that I own that's just mine. So for somebody who's, cohabitating with others and they want them to get on the same page, the first thing is just, have you done all of the work yourself? Like, have you gone through your clothes and your toiletries and your mementos and your photos? And sometimes even just having your family witness you do that without any pressure, without any, message of like, and you need to be doing this too with me. Sometimes that can spark some interest or some conversation. Once you've done all of that and you're feeling like you want to get your family on board, I would say having kind of a meeting of the minds to talk about goals and values and what are things that you and your family all want to do more of, and how can your home help facilitate that, is the best way in that I've found. I think people often make requests or ask or say this really affects me and it doesn't move the needle. But for example, my kids who could care less about decluttering, if they know that if our house is looking good, we're going to Paris, or they can have a big slumber party with all of their friends, the motivation comes really naturally. So finding some place of like connected or shared vision, whether it's like we want to travel more, or we want to host or entertain more, or we just want to like snuggle up and watch movies more, but right now our living room feels terrible. How can we work together to like create what we're wanting more of as a family?
I love that once everyone's bought into the vision that understands what needs to get done, it's just a lot easier to work towards that goal. So
Yeah.
Thank you, Shira. Next question, please. Jesselyn, any recommendations on how to get rid of sentimental items? This is a big one too.
So hard. So I'm assuming you mean emotionally letting go as opposed to like how or where to donate. If that's the case, I think what's helped me, so I'll just share something personal. So I lost my father suddenly 9 years ago. And so I was kind of responsible for all of his stuff. He had a 3-bedroom home. And me and my brother, who was much younger at the time, kind of had all of this stuff to deal with. And so when I was making those decisions, especially during kind of the shock of this loss, it really helped me to think about what is just stuff and what feels incredibly personal and emotionally resonant. And so, like for me, I decided housewares are just housewares, but like handwritten letters from my dad are really meaningful. And so that kind of choice allowed me to let go of mugs and coffee tables and, just things that felt like just things with ease. And then even within the category of keeping all of the letters and all of the photos, depending on what your goals are in your home and what storage you have, you could decide, I'm going to keep the 10 most meaningful. Or I've always really loved the rule of one. I think keeping one of a collection can often be much more poignant and valuable than having a mass of similar items. So when it comes to sentimental clutter, thinking within each category, like maybe you have a pile of sentimental t-shirts and you say, I'm going to pick my favorite 3. Or I'm going to take pictures of all of them and then let them all go. There's a lot of creative solutions too. I know people who have like made a quilt out of all of their sentimental t-shirts, or taken a little tiny shred of baby blanket and framed it and made it into art. So I think it's thinking about, first the boundaries and the limits just in terms of volume, and kind of whittling down to the things that feel like the real treasures. And then within that, finding a place to kind of display and honor them in your home, instead of turning your basement or garage kind of into a graveyard of stuff and spider webs.
Faye, first, thanks for sharing that very personal story about experience that you went through. Secondly, that quilt idea is very interesting. Thinking about like upcycling things that may have sentimental value for us and maybe bringing a new life or life form to them. Something that could be a very good approach for those who are thinking and looking at their sentimental items being, what should I do with this? Where does it go in my home?
Like I can tell you just with my dad, I ended up, my kind of boundary was 8 bins. That's what we had room for. And so of his entire, I think it was an 1,800 square foot home, I had to whittle that down to a handful of bins, which I did. And then now, a lot of time has passed, but I realized in my whole home, I only have about 3 of those items displayed. And so I'm not yet ready to let go of more. And I also want to encourage people to kind of go at that tenderly, like to be kind to yourself if you don't feel ready. So for me at this point in my life, I'm okay with those bins in the basement, even though they're not of use or of value actively. So I think it's also kind of knowing when to push yourself and when to go a little easy on yourself.
I think that's great advice for anyone who is, going through this type of evaluation currently today. And I think we have time for 2 more questions with Janelle. With the holidays approaching, how do you suggest navigating conversations with friends and family about not needing material gifts?
Love that question. I'm having a lot of those conversations right now. So I love to be just very open with my family members about my values, and that we have a small home and that we're trying to be more thoughtful and sustainable. And sometimes that helps with, the in-laws and other people who may have a different way of doing things. But what has helped me the most is actually for the people that really want to give a lot, is creating new creative solutions or rituals with them. So saying, we're totally maxed out on stuff, but what if we all did like an amazing trip together, or hosted a dinner together, or went in on one special thoughtful thing for this person instead of getting them 20 things. So it's coming at it with, here's the shared goal is the holidays are about like generosity and connection and community. They shouldn't really be rooted in just more stuff and more overwhelm. And so I guess sharing like, here are my personal goals and values, and here's how you can support me as a starting point. I, have a mother-in-law who I love so much, but loves getting lots of things for my kids. And so I had to, at a certain point, say, we simply don't have the room. So instead of getting 25 gifts, what about if you could just get each of them like a scooter, which they really want, and it's like a higher ticket thing, and we have space for it, and they're going to love it and be so excited. So it's kind of like starting those conversations of just, here are our values, or here's what we're up against, or here's what we're trying to create this year. And here are some creative ideas, but like, let's all collaborate and make sure we're doing something that feels good to everybody.
Of course. And along that, I would say I've also heard a lot of experiences becoming very popular too. Like, let's do a cooking class as a your knowledge about something. That's also very popular.
And edible, consumable gifts. I actually, my clutter-free gift guide comes out on my blog next week, and I found so many amazing things that are all consumable. So they're super fun, but then they're gone. And so that can be another thing for like the gift giver that loves giving, to give them, like, hey, we want, our favorite ice cream delivered on ice, or like Levan Bakery cookies, like, would be the most delightful thing on Christmas Eve. And then they get to give and you get to receive and not have any clutter.
Of course, and it's easily shared for everyone. Like, things are very easily shareable if there are no allergies or anything, but it's something that usually the whole family can, or, you can share with anyone if you wish.
Yes. I'm hoping for an ice cream subscription this year.
That sounds marvelous. I think we have time for just one last question.
Okay.
Catherine says, do you have recommendations for apps to declutter our tech spaces? Ooh, my photos, for example, sometimes get as cluttered as my closet, and so does my laptop. I think this is a very real question that many of us face.
It's so relatable, and I wish I had a magic app. I am in the process of, clearing my own photos and desktop, and, my broad piece of advice is just like, the more you can delete immediately. Like, I just found, I think I have 60,000 photos on my phone, which is not very clutter-free. And so I did a bunch of research, and one of the best pieces of advice I got is, on a day when you take a lot of photos, force yourself to pick the top 3 and delete the rest immediately. Likewise with the things on your desktop. I have everything in folders. So even if there's a lot of volume, everything is contained in a folder with a big, broad category. So I'm not just staring at a mess of folders and documents and apps. But yeah, I don't have off the top of my head a great app.
Thank you, Shira. And thank you, everyone, today for all the great questions. Again, you can get this amazing copy of Minimalista through the link that is listed below in this conversation. And Shira, it was a pleasure having you today. I feel like I and everyone else who has listened to this conversation is probably going to do a deep dive into our closets, kitchens, bookcases, everything, and think about, what do I really need? So thank you for providing us a lot of direction and just insight into how your process works. So thank you again, Shira.
Thank you so much. It was so fun to chat with you. Thanks.